She was 68. He was 28. People thought she'd lost her mind. A quiet woman, a retired nurse, known for her casseroles and quiet Sundays at church, suddenly showing up at the community center one afternoon hand in hand with a man who looked like he'd just walked out of a shelter. Because he had. A homeless man. No job. No family. No past. And 40 years younger. 2 months later, he disappeared. No calls. No notes. Not a single trace. Just gone. Like smoke in winter. The police thought she killed him. Her neighbors stopped answering her calls. Her son accused her of destroying the family. Her daughter smiled, but said nothing. But here's where it gets truly chilling. The man wasn't the con artist everyone thought. He was being conned himself. And the person behind it, the one pulling the strings, was someone sleeping just down the hall. It started on a Monday. She was handing out sandwiches at a church soup kitchen, same as she did every week. She liked the quiet rhythm of giving. It made her feel useful. That's when she saw him. Dirty hoodie, ragged jeans. But he looked up at her with clear green eyes and said, "You remind me of my mom." She laughed. He smiled. They talked. And the next week, he was back. Then again. Then again. People warned her. "You don't know who he is. He's using you." But she said, "He listens to me." Nobody's done that in years. 2 weeks later, he was living in her guest room. 3 weeks in, she gave him a phone. By the end of the month, they were married. And just when people were still reeling from the wedding, he was gone. She said he went out for groceries. Never came back. But neighbors whispered. She snapped. The cashier at the gas station said she saw her crying in her car for hours that night. Her own son flew in from Chicago and demanded she tell the truth. "What did you do to him, Mom?" She didn't answer. Not because she was guilty, because she didn't know either. And the worst part? Somewhere deep inside, a tiny part of her didn't want him to come back. Because she had started to feel afraid of him, of what he might be planning, of what he and her daughter had whispered about when they thought she was asleep. So where was he? Why was there blood under the bathroom sink? Why did her daughter suddenly have a new phone, new clothes, and a knowing smirk every time the police showed up? This is not just a story about love. It's not even just a crime story. This is about what happens when you choose to believe a lie because the truth is too painful to face. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about family, trust, and what people are capable of behind closed doors. She was born Margaret Ellen Whitmore in 1955, in a sleepy town in upstate New York where neighbors still waved and people still talked over white picket fences. She grew up in a modest home with strict Catholic parents who taught her the value of discipline, silence, and duty. Love wasn't spoken, it was implied, through packed lunches, clean laundry, and a pat on the shoulder when you cried. She followed the rules. At 19, she married George Whitmore, a tall, quiet mechanic who never raised his voice and never missed Sunday service. They had 2 kids, Jason and Lily. Margaret worked night shifts as a nurse for nearly 30 years, taking blood pressure readings, comforting the dying, and watching other people's families fall apart while trying to keep hers together. But holding things together doesn't mean they don't crack. George died of pancreatic cancer when he was just 58. It was fast. 1 scan, 6 weeks, gone. Margaret never cried in front of the kids. At the funeral, she held her composure like a brick wall. Only the night nurse at St. Paul's Hospital ever saw her sob, shaking in the break room with her face buried in her hands. After George died, things got quieter. Too quiet. Jason moved to Chicago after college. Business degree, good job, a family of his own. He called on holidays, sent her photos of his kids, but always kept a distance, like love through bulletproof glass. "Mom's strong," he'd say. "She doesn't need help." Lily was different. The family never talked about what happened to her in her teens. One summer, she came home with sunken eyes and started locking her bedroom door. By 21, she'd overdosed twice and was living with a man 10 years older who'd been arrested for drug possession. Margaret tried everything: therapy, interventions, even threatening to cut her off. But every mother knows, threats don't work when you're already scared of losing them. At 32, Lily moved back in with her. "Just until I get on my feet, Mom." That was 6 years ago. The 2 women lived like ghosts under one roof. Lily barely spoke to her. She slept all day, left without explanation, came back smelling of alcohol and secrets. Margaret cleaned up the bottles, folded her laundry, left plates of food in the microwave that often went untouched. She never asked questions. She just waited for her daughter to come back to life. Meanwhile, the house began to feel like a waiting room. For bedrooms and only echoes. Old wedding photos on the wall, dusty floral couches, a cross above the door. There were days Margaret didn't say a single word out loud. Only the TV kept her company. Reruns of Matlock, crime dramas, the weather. Once a week, she went to the soup kitchen at the local church. She didn't do it for charity. She did it for the noise, the motion, the reminder that the world hadn't completely left her behind. That's when she met him. But before that, before the headlines, before the wedding, before the whispers and the missing person report, Margaret was just a lonely woman in a cold house filled with the sound of nothing. The kind of woman who checked the mailbox even when she knew there was nothing coming. The kind of woman who wrapped leftover cake in tinfoil and saved it just in case someone visits. The kind of woman who still kept her husband's coat on the hook by the door, 13 years after his funeral. So when a young man with kind eyes looked her in the face and said, "You're beautiful when you smile," something cracked inside her. Not in a bad way. In a way that made room for hope. But hope, like all dangerous things, came at a price. And Margaret, poor Margaret, would end up paying for it with everything she had left. It was a Tuesday, cold and spitting rain, the kind that crept into your bones and stayed there. Margaret was late to the church kitchen that day. The soup was already boiling, the sandwiches wrapped in plastic. She tied her apron tighter than usual, a small attempt to feel some kind of control. That's when she noticed him. He wasn't like the others. Most people came in shuffling, shoulders slumped, eyes darting like they were afraid of being seen. But not him. He stood straight, almost proud, even as the sleeves of his hoodie hung in tatters and his shoes looked ready to fall apart. He smiled at her. Not the desperate, automatic smile people wear when they want something. This one was different. Calm. Measured. He said, "You've got a kind face." She blinked. No one had complimented her in years, not genuinely. She handed him a sandwich. He said thank you. She asked for his name. Kevin. She asked how long he'd been out on the street. He shrugged. Too long. She asked if he had any family. Not anymore. He didn't go into detail. And she didn't press. But something about the way he spoke, low, careful, a little too clean for someone who supposedly had no one, lingered with her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his voice in her head. That smile. The way he said, "You remind me of someone I once loved." The next week, he was back. And the week after that. Every time he came, he'd sit a little closer. He'd tell her stories, some tragic, some funny, some that didn't quite add up, but she never called him out. Stories about serving in the Marines, about a wife who left him, about a brother he lost in a fire. Each tale came with just enough detail to feel real. And she wanted to believe him. Desperately. One evening, she brought him a thermos of coffee and sat beside him on the curb outside the soup kitchen. They watched the steam rise. She told him about her late husband. About her children. Well, mostly Jason. She left out Lily. Something told her not to mention the daughter asleep in her house. He listened like no one had listened to her in years. Really listened. And when he gently placed his hand over hers and said, "You shouldn't be alone," she didn't pull away. Underscore. By the fourth week, she did what she never thought she'd do. She invited him home. Just for a shower. A warm bed. One night. Kevin looked surprised, but not too surprised. He was polite. Grateful. He didn't touch anything. Didn't snoop. He folded the guest sheets in the morning and offered to rake the leaves outside. Lily was the first to raise an eyebrow. She walked into the kitchen in a torn hoodie, stared at Kevin like she already knew the end of the story. "Mom, who the hell is that?" "A friend. Looks more like a stray." Margaret snapped. For once, she snapped. "At least he talks to me." Lily rolled her eyes and disappeared back upstairs, muttering something about desperate old women. But Kevin stayed. He offered to help cook. He repaired the broken step on the porch. He fixed a leaky pipe under the sink like he'd done it 100 times before. And when he spoke to Margaret, it was always with a softness that wrapped around her like a blanket. They laughed, shared meals, even watched TV together on that old floral couch. He told her she looked beautiful without makeup, that her hands were elegant. He made her feel seen, and she hadn't realized how invisible she'd become until that moment. Then came the day he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. Just a slow, deliberate kiss in the kitchen, over the scent of fried eggs and coffee. She didn't pull away. She didn't feel shame. She felt 28 again. I know this sounds crazy, he whispered, but I think I was meant to find you. The next day, he proposed. No ring, no kneeling, just a simple, trembling request. Let me be yours. I'll take care of you. I swear it. It should have raised alarms. But when you've been starving for affection, even poison tastes sweet. 2 weeks later, they were married in a small church with cracked stained glass. Just the two of them, a local pastor, and Lily sitting in the back pew. Arms crossed, lips curled in disdain. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, she didn't say a word. But Margaret saw her daughter's smirk as she walked down the aisle. And for a flicker of a moment, something twisted in her gut. Something cold. But it passed. Kevin kissed her, and she told herself, this is my second chance. Not knowing that behind that kiss was a secret she would never be ready for. The wedding happened faster than anyone thought possible. Some would say reckless. Others would say romantic. Margaret told herself it was fate, finally showing up after 68 long years. They were married just 17 days after she first brought Kevin home. No big dress, no music, no family gathered around. Just a plain navy blue skirt suit she'd saved from her nursing days and a local pastor who agreed to officiate on short notice. The ceremony was held in a nearly empty church on the edge of town, one with chipped paint and faded hymnals. Only 3 people sat in the pews, a volunteer from the soup kitchen, Lily, and a woman who used to live down the block. Jason didn't come. When Margaret called him with the news, he hung up. She tried to explain. He's kind, Jason. He treats me like I matter. Her son's voice cracked through the phone. He's a con artist, Mom. Can't you see that? But she didn't want to see it. Couldn't. For once in her life, someone chose her. Not for stability. Not because they had to. But because he said he wanted to. Kevin stood at the altar in borrowed slacks and a second-hand jacket. His hair was freshly cut, his smile careful. When he looked at her, Margaret felt beautiful. Not for her age. Just beautiful. She remembered the moment clearly. The pastor's voice echoing through the empty space. The soft shuffle of her shoes on the stone floor. The moment Kevin whispered, I'm the luckiest man alive, as he slipped a silver ring onto her finger. But what she remembered most, what she'd never forget, was the look on Lily's face. Not sadness. Not joy. Something colder. Calculating. She sat in the back row, chewing gum, legs crossed, arms folded. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. But her eyes followed Kevin every second, like a cat waiting. Later that night, as they returned home, Lily barely acknowledged them. She passed Kevin in the hallway and said, Congrats, Romeo. Kevin laughed. Margaret didn't. Underscore 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 underscore. The next few days were surreal. Kevin insisted on taking over the household chores. He said he wanted to pull his weight. He made breakfast, washed dishes, even cleaned the bathroom without being asked. Margaret was stunned by the sudden warmth in the house. For the first time in years, there was music in the kitchen and laughter in the living room. But there were signs. Subtle ones. He started asking for access to her computer, just to check something. He offered to set up online banking for her, to make life easier. And once, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him whispering in the kitchen with Lily. The words were too quiet to catch, but the silence afterward was deafening. A week later, Margaret found one of her credit cards missing. Kevin brushed it off. Probably just misplaced it. She believed him, because that's what love does. It makes you override your own instincts. But the neighbors didn't buy it. Word spread quickly. Margaret had married a homeless man 40 years younger. People whispered at church. The woman who ran the corner store stopped making small talk. Even the mailman started leaving the letters a little further from the door. Jason stopped returning her messages entirely. Margaret told herself it didn't matter. What mattered was that she wasn't alone anymore. She had a husband, a man who kissed her on the forehead, who said, I love you before bed, who rubbed her aching hands when they locked up from arthritis. She never asked why he still hadn't found a job. She didn't question why he never mentioned applying for one. And she certainly didn't want to believe that behind the warmth in his voice, behind the gentle way he touched her, there might be something else. Something waiting, watching, planning. The first few weeks of marriage were like a foggy dream. Warm, slow-moving, and just hazy enough to blur the edges of doubt. Margaret would wake up to the smell of bacon. Kevin hummed while cooking. He'd kiss her on the cheek and call her my girl, like some old-fashioned sweetheart from a forgotten movie. And in those moments, Margaret believed, really believed, that maybe, just maybe, she'd gotten lucky. That love didn't care about age or money or where someone came from. But love, as she would soon learn, wasn't the same as trust. It started with the mail. Margaret noticed letters going missing, bank statements, utility bills, Medicare notices. She thought she was misplacing them, maybe losing her memory. Kevin reassured her, "You've got a lot on your mind, honey. I'll handle the paperwork from now on." Then came the credit card calls. One afternoon, she received a voicemail from her bank's fraud department. Suspicious activity. A new iPhone ordered online. A gym membership in someone else's name. Kevin said it was probably a mistake. "You know how these companies mess up," he said, flashing that disarming smile. "I'll call them tomorrow." He never did. Margaret didn't follow up. She wanted to believe him, more than she wanted the truth. But the cracks were showing. He began disappearing at night. Said he was going for walks to clear his head. Sometimes he was gone for hours. One night, he didn't come home until dawn. When Margaret asked where he'd been, he looked her dead in the eye and said, "Just out. You don't need to worry about everything." She didn't push. She couldn't. Because a part of her was already afraid that if she questioned him, he'd vanish like all the others. Underscore. Then there was Lily. Her daughter had gone from barely speaking to Margaret to suddenly spending a lot of time downstairs. She and Kevin would sit outside, smoking, whispering. Margaret caught the tail end of one conversation. Something about timing and not screwing this up. She asked them what they were talking about. Kevin smiled. Lily didn't. "Relax, Mom," Lily muttered. "You don't need to know everything." Margaret tried to shake the feeling. Maybe she was just paranoid. Maybe it was her age. Maybe this was what a modern marriage looked like. Messy, uncertain, built on faith instead of facts. But that didn't explain the missing jewelry. 3 days before Kevin vanished, Margaret opened the velvet box where she kept her engagement ring from George. It was gone. So was a pearl necklace her mother had given her. Kevin claimed he hadn't seen them. Suggested maybe Lily took them. When Margaret asked Lily, her daughter laughed. Not nervously, mockingly. "Why would I want your dusty old crap?" Margaret didn't know what to believe. The people closest to her had started to feel like strangers. Shadows in her own home. The final straw came on a Sunday morning. Margaret had made pancakes. Kevin was gone, again. Lily came down looking hungover, lips chapped, hoodie pulled tight. They sat in silence. Then, without looking up, Lily said, "He's not who you think he is." Margaret froze. "What does that mean?" Lily smirked. "You'll see." No further explanation. No follow-up. She left the table and slammed the door to her room. Later that day, Margaret opened her laptop, one of the few things Kevin hadn't touched, and typed in his full name. Or, at least, the one he gave her. Nothing. No records. No photos. No social media. No military service. No tax documents. No driver's license. It was as if he didn't exist. The next morning, he was gone. His toothbrush, his jacket, even the wallet he always kept in the kitchen drawer, gone. Margaret waited, heart hammering. Every hour a louder silence. She texted, called, checked the hospitals. Nothing. And still, deep down, beneath the panic and fear, a sick part of her felt relief. Because for all the sweetness, the soft gestures, the kind eyes, she had begun to feel watched, controlled, played. She just hadn't admitted it to herself. Not until it was already too late. At first, Margaret thought he'd just gone to the store. It was a Monday, cloudy still. Kevin had mentioned they were out of milk the night before. He said he'd run out early and grab some, maybe a few other things. Margaret made him a list. She folded it twice, tucked it in his pocket. He kissed her on the forehead and walked out the door at 7:13 a.m. That was the last time she saw him. By 10 a.m., She started to worry. By noon, she'd called him twice. Straight to voicemail. By 3 p.m., the panic had turned to something worse, stillness. The hours stretched long and dry, every creak in the house louder than the last. She kept looking out the window. No sign of him. No text. No call. No Kevin. At 6:20 p.m., she called the police. My husband, he's missing. Underscore. The officer on the line was polite, almost bored. Ma'am, how long has he been gone? Since this morning. He never came back. Has he done this before? A pause. He disappears sometimes. But never like this. They told her to wait 48 hours. Adults had the right to go missing, they said. He could have needed space. Maybe he got cold feet. Margaret didn't believe that. Not this time. She searched the neighborhood. She walked to the store herself. No one had seen him. She called local hospitals. Nothing. She tried shelters. No record. She even checked the morgue. No John Doe. No accidents reported. It was like he'd been erased. By day 3, the police finally sent someone to the house. They asked for a photo. She didn't have many. Kevin hated pictures. She handed over the blurry image from their wedding day. The officer studied it. You said he was homeless before you met? She nodded. The officer's expression barely moved. Did he ever show you ID? She froze. Her mouth went dry. No, she admitted. I guess I never asked. The officer nodded slowly, as if the case was writing itself. Underscore. They searched his name through every available database. No matches. No birth certificate. No military records. Not even a library card. His social security number? Fake. Driver's license? Forged. Kevin Whitmore had never existed. Margaret sat in her living room, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the blank space where his jacket used to hang. She whispered, "Then who did I marry?" That was when suspicion turned toward her. The police returned a week later, this time with a different tone. They asked to search the house. She agreed. What else could she do? They combed through every room, took photos, collected hair from the bathroom sink, fingerprinted doorknobs, dug through her trash, found a drop of something, dark, reddish-brown, under the bathroom vanity. It was blood. The lab confirmed it. But it didn't belong to Margaret. And without a DNA profile, they couldn't match it to Kevin either. Because Kevin, as far as the system was concerned, had no DNA. The case stalled. Underscore. But whispers didn't. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. The woman at church stopped shaking her hand. Even the postman began delivering mail with his eyes averted. Margaret was no longer a widow or a wife. She was a suspect. Jason finally called, angry, bitter, disgusted. "I told you, Mom. I told you this would happen. You let a stranger into our family. And now he's gone. You think that looks good?" Margaret tried to defend herself, but every word sounded like guilt. She was alone. Again. Except for Lily. Her daughter barely reacted to the news. When Margaret told her the police were investigating, Lily didn't flinch. She just nodded, took a sip of wine, and said, "Maybe he got what he deserved." Margaret stared at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lily looked her dead in the eye. "You tell me." Underscore. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat in Kevin's empty chair, wrapped in his old hoodie, her hands trembling. Somewhere between the questions and the silence, a thought took root, one she'd tried to suppress. What if she hadn't been the only one he was manipulating? And what if someone else, someone closer, had been watching the whole thing unfold? Not with love, but with something else. Something colder, and far more dangerous. It came from a neighbor. 3 weeks after Kevin disappeared, Margaret was watering the wilting begonias on her porch when Mrs. Randall, the retired teacher next door, walked over, arms crossed tight, eyes cautious. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began. But I saw something that night. Margaret's breath caught. Mrs. Randall continued, "Your daughter. Around 2 in the morning. She was dragging something to the back of her car. A big black trash bag. Looked heavy." Margaret's hands froze on the watering can. "Are you sure? I know what I saw." Underscore. Margaret went to the police the next day. They reopened the investigation immediately. This time, the questions were different. Less about Kevin's identity, more about Lily. A warrant was issued. Her car was impounded. What they found inside changed everything. Traces of blood in the trunk, enough to suggest a violent injury. A pair of gloves, stiff with dried fluid. And a broken necklace, tangled in hair. Margaret identified the necklace immediately. It was hers. She hadn't seen it in weeks. DNA analysis confirmed what no one was ready to hear. The blood in the car matched the sample found in the bathroom. And the hair? Male. Brown. Unidentifiable, but consistent with Kevin's. The theory shifted overnight. Margaret was no longer the prime suspect. Lily was. Underscore. When confronted, Lily denied everything. Said she'd been cleaning out the garage. Claimed the trash bag was old bedding. As for the blood, I cut myself shaving. Jesus. But she couldn't explain the gloves. Or why Kevin's hoodie was buried under the tarp in the trunk. Or how her fingerprints ended up on the fake ID Kevin had used to marry her mother. The story began to crack. And then it broke. During a second interview, Lily asked for a lawyer. 2 hours later, she changed her statement. She didn't confess, not exactly. But she said enough. He was messing with both of us. You don't understand what that does to a person. Underscore. Margaret was called into the station. They asked if she was aware that Kevin and Lily had been exchanging messages, private, encrypted ones, on a hidden app. She wasn't. The detectives showed her screenshots, messages from Kevin's phone backed up to a cloud drive Lily had accessed, conversations late at night, jokes about the old lady, mentions of transferring money, plans for after it's done. But the tone changed weeks before Kevin vanished. His messages shifted, from flirty to cold, almost threatening. He'd started pulling away. And Lily? She didn't like being discarded. One message stood out. If he thinks he can use me and leave, he has no idea who he's dealing with. Underscore. The evidence mounted. A grainy gas station camera captured Lily driving out of town at 2:47 a.m. the night Kevin disappeared. She was alone. In the passenger seat, a large, dark bag. They followed the route. 10 miles north, just off a gravel road near Lake Rowan, police found what was left of a fire pit. Ashes, charred cloth, bits of metal. Among the debris was Kevin's belt buckle. No body, no bones, but enough to build a case. Lily was arrested for obstruction and suspected homicide. Underscore. Margaret didn't cry when the officers came to take her daughter away. She sat on the porch, staring at the begonias. They were dead now. When the cruiser pulled out of the driveway, Lily turned her head. For the first time in years, their eyes met without anger. No hate, no blame, just silence. Later, alone in the house, Margaret found a photo wedged behind the dresser in Lily's room. It was of the three of them, taken early on, before the wedding. Margaret in the center, smiling too hard. Kevin's arm draped casually around both women. Lily's eyes were locked on him. Not with love, with possession. Margaret held the photo tight and whispered, "I should have known." But how could she have? When your own child carries darkness, it doesn't arrive with warning signs. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It blends in. It wears your face. The courtroom was cold. Margaret sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, body still, face pale. She wore the same gray cardigan she'd worn to Kevin's memorial, the one they held without a body. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, local onlookers, and people who had once smiled at her in the grocery store. Now they stared at her like she was some tragic warning, a walking cautionary tale. At the defense table sat Lily, her daughter, stone-faced, chin high, hands cuffed. She hadn't looked at Margaret once since the arrest. But everything changed when the prosecutor played the recording. Underscore. It was taken from a phone Lily had smashed and thrown into a river, thinking it was lost forever. But data recovery is persistent and brutal. The voice on the tape was unmistakable. Kevin, you think I'm scared of you? Lily, you should be. Kevin, I was done with you the second she said yes. Lily, you promised we'd take everything together. Then you married her. Kevin, because she's the one with the house. The savings. You were just part of the setup. A pause. Then something that sounded like a scuffle. Breathing. Heavy. A thud. Then silence. Underscore. Gasps filled the courtroom. Margaret felt her stomach drop through the floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She had always known something was wrong. But not this. Not this. The prosecutor laid it out in chilling detail. Kevin had originally conspired with Lily to manipulate Margaret, convince her to marry him, transfer assets, gain access to her accounts. They would then stage a disappearance, drain the funds, and flee together. But Kevin changed the plan. He wanted out, with everything, without Lily. And Lily couldn't handle it. The prosecution alleged that in a fit of rage and betrayal, she killed him. Not out of cold strategy, but burning jealousy. The woman who once said, "He's using you," had been the one who helped him do it, until he turned on her. Underscore. The defense tried to paint Lily as a manipulated victim. They claimed Kevin had emotionally abused her, used her addiction, her past, her loneliness, to control her. They said the murder wasn't planned. It was a breakdown, a cry for help. But the messages told another story. The jurors read them, line by line. Dark, sarcastic, cruel. Conversations between Lily and Kevin about her mother, about Margaret, about how old women are easy to play if you know how to smile right. One message from Lily, 2 weeks before Kevin disappeared, silenced the courtroom entirely. If he ever tries to ghost me, I swear to God, he'll vanish for real. Underscore. Margaret didn't speak during the trial. She was never called to testify. But every day, she showed up, sat through every minute. And when the verdict came, she was there. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Fraud. Identity theft. Obstruction of justice. Lily showed no emotion, no tears, no outburst, just a quiet, almost bored acceptance as the judge sentenced her to 28 years in prison. On her way out, flanked by deputies, she finally looked at her mother. Their eyes locked. Margaret wanted to ask why, but Lily's face had already answered it. Because I could. Underscore. After the sentencing, Margaret walked out of the courthouse alone. The sun was too bright, the sky too blue. People brushed past her, some offering quick, sympathetic glances. Others just kept walking. She didn't go home right away. She sat on a park bench for over an hour, holding her purse like a lifeline, staring at the patch of sidewalk where, once, Kevin had kissed her hand. It hadn't been real. None of it. But her grief was. So was the ache in her chest every time she thought of Lily as a baby, curled up against her chest, warm, soft, innocent. That child was gone. Maybe had been for a long time. But now Margaret knew the truth. And the truth, brutal as it was, no longer hid in shadows. It had a face. And that face called her mom. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. After the trial, Margaret returned to a place that no longer felt like home. The living room still smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, but it was hollow now. Kevin's toothbrush was gone. Lily's bedroom was stripped bare by police. The walls echoed. No footsteps. No laughter. No arguments. Just silence. Jason didn't call. Not after the verdict. Not even after the sentencing. He hadn't spoken to Margaret since the day he yelled at her through the phone, his voice thick with anger and disappointment. You let this happen, Mom. You brought him into our lives. Underscore. Her son had always kept his distance, but now he was gone completely. His emails stopped. Birthday cards for the grandkids never arrived. She'd become a ghost to her own family. Margaret tried writing him once. A letter, handwritten, trembling. She apologized. Not just for Kevin. For everything. For not seeing. For not protecting. For letting the fracture between them grow so wide. They could no longer hear each other. She never got a reply. And Lily? Lily was locked behind concrete and steel. 28 years. Margaret visited once, 6 months after the trial. She waited in the cold plastic chair for nearly 40 minutes before her daughter shuffled in. Thinner, her eyes dull, her hair tied back like it didn't matter anymore. They didn't embrace. Margaret asked if she was okay. Lily nodded, then shrugged. Doesn't matter, she said. You're the one who's free. Margaret asked why. Lily didn't answer. Just stared at the clock behind her mother's head until the hour was up. When the guards came to escort her out, she walked away without looking back. Margaret never visited again. Underscore. She sold the house. Too many rooms. Too many shadows. She moved into a small apartment closer to town. Just 2 rooms, a kettle, and a view of the parking lot. The neighbors were polite. No one asked questions. She liked that. Most days, she went unnoticed. She liked that too. But at night, when the television was off and the lights were dim, Margaret would sometimes sit with the wedding photo still tucked in the drawer beside her bed. Her and Kevin, smiling, foolish, caught in a moment she now knew had never been real. She had loved. She had lost. And what remained was a kind of silence that wasn't just quiet, but permanent. Underscore. She received one final letter from Lily 2 years later. It was short. I think about you. I don't blame you. I wish things had been different. Margaret didn't write back. There was nothing left to say. Underscore. She wasn't angry anymore. Not at Kevin. Not even at Lily. Grief had replaced the fire with ash. And what hurt most wasn't betrayal. It was the memory of who they could have been. A husband. A daughter. A family. Instead, she had a history she couldn't bear to tell. And a future that no longer needed her in it. Some nights, when the world outside was dark and still, Margaret would whisper into the empty room. I just wanted to be loved. And there was no one left to answer. Years passed. Margaret grew older, quieter. Her hair thinned, her steps slowed. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. Most people in her building didn't even know her name. They called her the woman on the 3rd floor. She never corrected them. Her days were small. Tea in the morning, a walk to the mailbox, sometimes a crossword she rarely finished. The world outside kept spinning, fast and loud. But inside her apartment, time moved differently, like it was waiting for something that never came. There were no more visits. No more family. The phone stayed silent. Holidays passed like ordinary days. No cards. No knocks at the door. She'd become the kind of woman people forget about until they see her obituary. But Margaret didn't feel sorry for herself. Not anymore. Because she understood something now, something that had taken her a lifetime to learn. Love doesn't always arrive in the shape we recognize. Sometimes, it comes dressed in promises. In soft hands and sweet voices. In people who know just how to look at you when you're most alone. And sometimes, that kind of love ruins you. Underscore, underscore. She used to believe the worst thing in life was being alone. She was wrong. The worst thing is loving someone who wears your love like a mask. The worst thing is realizing that your heart was never broken by strangers, but by those you gave it to freely. And in the end, it wasn't Kevin who destroyed her. It wasn't even Lily. It was hope. That fragile, dangerous hope that maybe, this time, someone meant it. Underscore, Before she died, Margaret left behind only one letter. No names, no blame, just 12 handwritten words on a folded piece of paper, tucked inside a Bible. Be careful who you open your door to. Not everyone knocks. This story isn't just about a woman who married a stranger. It's about what loneliness can do when it finds a heartbeat. It's about betrayal, slow, quiet, intimate. And it's about how sometimes the deepest wounds aren't from what people do to you, but from what you believe about yourself when they're done. If this story moved you, share it. Not because it's shocking, but because somewhere, someone else is opening their door to the wrong person, and they don't know it yet.